What do you miss most about the 1990s if you were alive then? The ability to be unreachable. The political culture was regular toxic, not the unholy blend we have now. Literally everything. Legit. I'm very nostalgic about the 90s, maybe to a fault. TGIF on ABC. The Clinton scandal being our biggest concern. Crying face. Being a small child, happy and carefree. The music uniting people. Music was everything. I also miss eye contact and conversation. Hell, talking on the phone for hours was great. We would watch TV together or just hang out talking, but not necessarily non-stop. Hanging out without being traceable was great. Being a kid playing video games and playing with friends without a care in the world. I miss the innocence I had, also getting away with stuff simply BC there weren't cameras everywhere. I'm so glad I grew up before everything was documented on film. No proof. Miss the simplicity and innocence of 90s pop culture nostalgia. Social stability. Video stores. Kids playing outside. My family members who were still around, like my grandparents and great-grandparents. Grunge music. Attitude Era in WWE. The feeling that things in general were pretty good, with none of the constant worry about the future we get to enjoy now. I used to ride my bike to a Blockbuster, rent a Nintendo 64 game and play it for a weekend. But a lot of what we loved about the 90s was nostalgia because we were younger. Born in '89, so the 90s were little kid times for me. When you wanted to play console games with friends back then, you'd ride your bike to somebody's house where everyone was with a controller and a rumble pack. Then it was Hawaiian Punch Squeeze at fueled split-screen shenanigans on a giant CRT for hours with your buddies. Super fun as a kid. Being happy. R&B vocal groups. Boyz II Men. En Vogue. Jodeci. SWV. There was a minute in the mid-90s where 3 and 4-part harmony was a thing. Groups who could sing. And they could do it live. These guys never quite made it, but damn. 4 p.m. I died a little inside when I read If You Were Alive Then. Life just felt easier and free and definitely more affordable. My dad. Also how the world didn't seem doomed. Not worried about security and attacks at events or airports or schools. The absolute optimism. The 90s were full of a proto-inclusionary thought that it was fine that a person could have their own arc. You could just be you with societal restrictions. Now? Everything fought for us, either gone or under attack. MTV playing music, arcades worth going to because they had all the hottest games, because there was no social media. I didn't realize 99% of people are dumb as fuck. I like how we'd go to school the next day and everyone watched the same show or movie the night before and could discuss it. Nowadays, there are a million streaming channels with a million shows each. Not everyone watches the same shows. The closest I felt that in recent times was when people watched Game of Thrones, and most of us were talking about it at work together. However, there is always that segment who likes to brag that they don't watch it. Common culture. Everyone knew about the same pop culture events, news events, etc. I think the death of common culture has really divided people more than we realized. When my dad would take me to Blockbuster on a Thursday night to rent a video game, so it was waiting for me when I got home from school on Friday, also switching between Fox Kids, Kids WB, ABC Kids, Fox Family, Nickelodeon, and Cartoon Network on Saturday and Sunday morning to watch cartoons. Being a teenager, people were more humane, hopeful and less selfish. Family meetings were larger, social rules were in a way simpler, and opportunities to have a simple life were easier. Waking up without a sore back. Things used to cost quarters and nickels in the corner stores and gas stations. It wasn't as crazy as it is now. It was a safer time, things seemed easier, life felt great. Friday night television shows. More wholesome, less politically charged. Punk rock and street skating. The music. No internet in the early 90s. Glorious times, man. Not getting patted down at the airport. My childhood. And rap music was 10 million better than it is today. Playing Pokemon Blue with the rest of the world completely irrelevant. Not having the internet everywhere. Small local coffee shops instead of franchises. Music from the 90s. Malls. Being young. MDMA. The fact that my fuck-ups were nor recorded. Going to the video store and getting 10 for 10. Making mixtapes. Listening to albums in full and reading liner notes. This is why I buy records. Doing all of the acid and mushrooms. Napster. Being a kid. Those wooden playgrounds. Bogs. That smell when you entered a video rental store. A mixture of plastic and disinfectant full of promises for a Friday night with a pizza and 80s movie action glory. Magazine subscriptions. If you said something, assumers wouldn't immediately disregard the context to distort what you said and screech at you. The 70s. As a kid I was freely allowed to roam the neighborhood from dawn till dusk. Parents didn't care if I was next door or in the next state as long as I got my arse home before dark. US basketball dream team, especially MJ. Cartoon Network. That and networks having more than one of 3 shows. The raves and the pills that went along with them. Being one. Nestle made a microwavable Nestle Crunch brand chocolate ice cream topping. I know they are the devil now and it was probably a terrible food product, but I love that shit. My team winning fucking titles. The idea that the internet was going to make everything better, everyone will be educated and more enlightened. Information wants to be free, was the phrase. The uncensored internet. Everything was shared freely. No cancel culture. No censorship. The idea that things would get better. Kind of funny seeing people say it was safer back then. It really wasn't. Crime went down every year until recently and it hasn't gone up to the levels of like 92. And if you think the 80s and 70s were safer times, you're crazy. Edit, things are probably going to get a lot worse. I recognize the optimism about the future. Also the rise of post-grunge alt-rock. Yes, it sucks, but it also fucking slaps. Pop music was more fun. Politics was still crazy, but it wasn't at the extremely toxic level it's at now. Now you have politicians actively calling for the elimination of certain groups and eroding a woman's right to choose. It's become extremely frightening. Malls were still thriving, not having to pay bills. Not being bombarded with a heap of poor quality articles on the internet. Not that there weren't any then, just that there's more of them now. I liked talking on the phone more then. I hate it now. Media play, video games not being solved immediately. The internet and hardcore gamers have ruined the MMO genre, the way Reese's peanut butter cups used to taste. They kind of suck now compared to back then. My son being a toddler and young kid. He is an amazing adult and we are very close, but I would like to go back occasionally and re-spend that time with him. It was magical, not having to consent to cookies on every click. I was a child in the 90s. I miss not knowing how fucked up the world and people are. When the internet wasn't the center of everyone's lives. When people looked at each other while talking instead of looking down at their phones. It was more peaceful. The 1990s had plenty of shit, but it was so much quieter than it is now. Libraries, totally disappearing, mall arcades, people watching at the food court. Danzig, Slayer, Ace of Base, etc. The music, movies, and general pop culture of the times. Looking back now, it's wild that I grew up in an era when Tupac and Nirvana were on the radio. Seeing blockbusters like Titanic and Men in Black in the theaters, and the internet was beginning to hit its stride. I was born in '88, so I think I grew up at just the right time to witness all these perfectly encapsulated moments of the 90s eras, and each day that I get older, I miss that time even more. Much less advertising, a lack of day one DLC, and how things like skins were unlockable in games and not behind a paywall. It bothers me that the industry is relying on people growing up with this as a norm to push it more. I miss BBSs from the 80s and 90s. Out of all the people I know now, only one remembers them, and they were also a sysop. The sheer variety of how each of the different boards worked is still mind-boggling, and still almost everyone had a version of Trade Wars and LORD running. A consistent amount of great video games because the 2 biggest gaming companies on Earth were actively competing for our attention. And we were the target audience that reaped the benefits. The lack of social media and technological distractions. The pace of life overall was still bearable. I miss being able to read a whole freaking book without interruption. Nickelodeon. 90s Nickelodeon was unmatched. No social media was the best thing at that time. Everything. Jinko. There, I said it. Being 2 weeks or less old. Record stores, great music and concerts, and Blockbuster meeting men organically. Not online. Feeling safe. Living in the moment. Orbit's the drink, not the rent-a-car. Crystal Pepsi, and everything on Nickelodeon, Up and It'll are real monsters. Need to differentiate between internet for those who know and the masses. Split-screen multi-layer. Cheap food. House prices weren't increasing in an insane way. Music, being outside all the time. Playing freely at the park with the entire street of kids. Exploring. Feeling like the world was this awesome discovery. When I could prank call from a public payphone. Where are all the public payphones nowadays? Magic the Gathering, Diablo, The X-Files. The music, if you were into grunge, indie rock, sorry 90s punk fans, best era for that was 80s or 70s. I wasn't so much into hip-hop or R&B then, but I definitely appreciate the songs from then nowadays. Also the rave scene, which was at its peak towards the tail end of the 90s. Also miss those Usenet newsgroups. In a way, a precursor to today's Reddit. Anticipation. Not sure the score of the game? Missed a highlight? It's all accessible via SportsCenter, but we just didn't have immediate access. Movie spoilers, TV, fucking albums, you didn't listen to the whole thing unless you camped at a record store or bought it. Going outside, no social media or influences. It was a good decade for movies. The 2000s were peak movie. After that it's been largely disappointing.